back to Film in Minnesota. I'm your host, Alan Tracy.
I am Rahana Power.
And today we have Simone LeClaire joining us. Hello, Simone.
Hello, you two, and I'm so happy to be here.
We are really excited to have you. Thank you so much for taking the time today.
Definitely. Thank you, guys.
Simone, I'm going to jump right into it because I am excited to get to know you better. But first, before we get into the film of it all, I want to know just a little bit more about you. So, can you tell us what is something fun, interesting, unique, like a talent or skill that you have, whether everybody knows about it or maybe you've kept it pretty secret up until now and I'm just forcing you to tell the whole world?
Yes, so I will tell what has been on the down low, or DL. But during the pandemic, I began learning one of my lifelong dreams, which is to learn cello. So everybody kind of is like, oh, cello is the hardest instrument and it's not worth it if you don't start when you're like 3 years old. But I've always loved the cello, and I have just played I haven't really played an instrument since high school when I played saxophone. But it just has been really nice to introduce like that aspect of music and that totally other like creative medium, and something that is really difficult but like tactile in all of these different ways. So it's like beginner, it's just on a lot of levels. It's like beginner's mindset, and then stimulating in all these different ways. So yeah, I've been having a fun time. I just had my 1 year's anniversary with cello.
Oh.
That's exciting. Well, congratulations.
Thank you very much.
That's a really cool hobby to pick up. So yeah, props to you for deciding to just go for it because you wanted to, and not letting all the people who say hey, it's too hard get in your head. That is awesome. If we had time, I would be like, hey, Simone, you should go and get your cello because that's super cool.
Yeah.
I won't put you through that yet. I mean, what they say about the difficulty level, definitely true.
Really?
Okay.
But it's great for my perfectionist mind, because, the embodiment of playing and learning, and I can tell where the improvements are happening. But you definitely have to let go of a lot. I think that's why my teacher said that is why it's so much easier to teach kids, is because kids don't care if they sound like shit. Oh, I don't know if it's swearing. But kids just don't care if they sound bad. Where adults are I know what it sounds like. Not only I know what it sounds like, but I care if it sounds bad. So yeah, great practice. Great practice for me.
I love the cello in film scores and everything. It's just usually it's the cello, and there's been a bit of cello in some of my short films, so yeah.
It's great because it's such a versatile instrument, and there's just so many different kinds of sounds it can have. So yeah, really applicable for film scores. If you wanted something, really singular, or you want that whole orchestral thing, or you want folksy or whatever. So yeah, great. I know the same. I usually, even if you just want to start at that point, it's just a great tester instrument for what do I want with this?
Yeah.
I'm gonna bridge the gap now really quick.
Bridge the gap.
And then I'm gonna really kick us off. Is there a part of you in your super creative and perfectionist brain that says, I want to get to the point where one of my films someday has me playing the cello in it, is part of the score and soundtrack?
I was gonna,
Maybe if it was I don't know if that's something I would get to the point of. I guess if it was more okay, the point of this film, this very personal and poetic film, is that I do each part of it, and that's regardless of how good I it's regardless of how good I am. It's not so much as like I want to get good enough at cello that it like is good enough for my films, because I feel like that's just like an ego thing that I don't, that the project would suffer. Yeah. But if it was a process-based thing where the point of the process and project is bringing together these different things that I personally am contributing to it, then maybe something like that.
That's a really cool idea too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nice.
One woman band. Yeah. I've heard of that. I've heard like seen news articles about like someone who did everything themselves, and it was just like a feature film too. And it was just kind of wow. Really? You're going to do it all yourself. Good luck.
I mean, I think it's just different approach. I feel like that's a whole different approach and almost a different kind of project, different like end product. But that is kind of the cool thing about film, is there's so many different ways that we can approach, and so many like standards by which we can judge something, and they shouldn't be judged by each other. So if that was what like somebody wanted to do, I mean, cool. We'd all be curious. We'd be curious to see what came out of that. Like, yeah.
Absolutely.
I got you. Okay, Simone. So how did you get started in film? Like what brought you into film, really?
I got started in film as a teenager. So I grew up in northern Minnesota, like very rurally around Cass Lake, Minnesota, and my parents happened to not let us watch TV, and there's this it's kind of a different. They are very different worlds from the city to like living in areas like that. So anyway, I was like obliviously a goody two shoes, and I didn't do anything interesting like drink or anything as a child. So it was like something that I started doing with my sister, was making little videos, making films. And it was kind of like discovering that. I think we were probably early teenagers when we first started to do that as like something to do. And it was just something I really fell in love with right away, sort of organically, just in the different intelligences that you use in the different parts of the process. And it's kind of this stimulating in so many different ways, and it just like to so many different parts of me, like the organizational part and the creative part and this like the visual part, and then the technical part of like trying to make it work at the end. Even in those really small productions, like you already could start to feel like, oh, that's so cool. Like it's like a play, or it's like a story. I like doing those things as a kids too. It's like that, but it's like all together. And then at the end, you get to show it to people, and you can watch it again and again and again. And so I kind of had a very just natural love for it for that reason. And then after that, I went on to study it in college at Morehead State University. So just a couple of hours from where I grew up.
Oh.
That's awesome.
So I've like my whole film journey has been in Minnesota, which is kind of It's kind of interesting, kind of specific. Yeah.
We're gonna have some questions on that here coming up, but first, I really am interested and want to touch base on your most recent feature-length film. And can you tell us like how that sort of became something that you wanted to make?
Well, in terms of features, I have one feature in that I have directed. I have one in feature in post-production and one in pre-production development.
Wow.
Okay, so a couple of, wow.
So, yeah. And the one in post-production is, I guess, would be the first one. I'm assuming it will get done before the other one.
Right.
But we never know. We never know how these timelines go. So, yeah, that is, I guess, what I would consider the first feature, directorial feature. And it's a documentary, which prior to that point, all my short films have been narrative. But this is a story, it's called Sunflower Man, and it's kind of framed like a legend. That's the recent idea that I had. But that's kind of been the heart of it that I just recently articulated. But it is called Sunflower Man, and it's about my uncle, who is a person living with paranoia and schizophrenia in northern Minnesota. And it's about him growing this field, like covering his property with this field of giant sunflowers just because he wanted to. So it's kind of framed with the sunflowers growing from springtime to fall. And he's just going through his different phases and cycles that he goes through with his health and mental health and just him living in his life, I guess. And he's talking about, just different dreams, projects, things he's tried doing, different parts of his life, and how it is for him living with that mental state. So yeah, I'm still not. I mean, it's been changing. So like the way that I used to pitch it, I'm like, it's not quite how I'm like pitching it anymore, because I have been sort of adjusting it in post production. So yeah, that's really helpful to be asked, actually, because that project, I also have been keeping it kind of close, but I'm only just now starting to like put the cuts out for feedback and like start to get those other eyes on it. So yeah, but that's where that project is. And I wanted to tell it, I guess like it's, when we have an idea or drawn to make a movie, I think it's hard to totally communicate, especially in hindsight. Like we can make a story about why we want to make that or how that developed, but I think some good ideas, they seem to like come and you're just like, here's the process I want to go on. And with Rogan, I guess like I just felt something so genuine and all genuine about him in the way that he expresses, and really needed to hear, because within my family dynamic or these other dynamics I see him in, really silenced and being this like quiet, silence, unsure person. And it was like so great, like as soon as we put the microphone on him, he just is talking and telling all these stories and just really like using his voice to describe how it is, here's how it is to be me. I think when we have, I guess at least in this case, I would say this is an example of when we have people who have their voices silenced and other people speak for them, which people with mental illness is a huge, diverse community of people who that happens to. It's just really important. What are the ways we can listen to those people speak for themselves? And people, like, something that's interesting to me at this point is also like specifically like paranoia, schizophrenia. Sorry, I'm nerding out. But like,
you're good. This is fascinating.
But like, so if we think about paranoia and schizophrenia, and I think it's really helpful to think, I usually think, what are the cinematic representations we have seen of this thing, whether it's women, queer women, or like whatever it is. So like with Rogan, if you think about paranoia and schizophrenia, those are like the things that specific aspect of like mental illness or the mental workings of our brain is one of the most terrifying things to us. Like that's a source of so much in horror cinema. Like somebody paranoid of something or hearing voices, what a like cheap shot that is to like freak us out in cinema or really other someone. Like nothing's gonna other somebody like thinking this person is batshit and it's because they're paranoid of things that aren't there and they're schizophrenic. Like that. So how that has been utilized and what sort of representations we've actually seen of those people are still so primitive and just inaccurate, and it's just this othering that we all do. So like when Rogan is like talking about how it is for him like to hear voices, it is so many things throughout the film that are actually so like deeply honest, genuine, and just relatable. Like he would describe how it is for him and he's like, it starts off in the lower levels. It's just a voice criticizing everything I do, like criticizing every flaw that I have. And so, but like if we think of how we negative self-talk with ourselves and people who have done any work to like, how the fuck is my brain actually working, you know, or stream of conscious journaling or anything like that, that's very common throughout all of us, is that there is some like shit talker, just like, you did this, you did da 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 da. And regardless of how conscious we are of that, like with him, it's just very conscious and very present of that voice. So yeah, I just think, there's just something there that like really feels worthwhile for me to keep going along that process, and we'll see how the film eventually turns out because it's already changed. So
right. But I have a question about that in terms of your making a documentary, choosing to do that first. I've made a short documentary. I haven't done a feature documentary, but I know it changed because the story was different than I expected, maybe. So tell us about that, your process for like maybe, well, if what you can tell us, that is, in terms of like maybe your in post-production or even production in general.
Yeah. Well, I guess what attracted me in the first place was I liked the framing. So I'm usually looking for like something, and this is sort of within narrative or documentary. It's kind of moving more towards each other. So either genre, I'm kind of doing this where I'm looking for some way to create a container, and also some way for that container to hold improvisation and spontaneity and something unprepared and unplanned. So with this, what I liked was like, okay, here's this challenge to grow these giant sunflowers over this really short growing season in northern Minnesota. And it's an additional challenge because Rogan talks about his own challenges with like starting a project and not completing it. So there's these different things, whether it's environmental or internal, that are like, can we do this? And we're doing it. Why? Well, kind of just because he wants, that's what he's motivated to do, and he wants to. So it's this container through the seasons of like growing the sunflowers. They're supposed to be 16 feet tall, and it's like, will we get to see this field of sunflowers? Seeing them at the different stages, seeing Rogan at the different stages. But it also is like, well, we don't totally know what's going to happen, what's Rogan going to want to talk about, and what happens after that point. So yeah, that's kind of what appealed to me from the beginning, was just that balance of structure and unknown. And I thought that it was really doable for me on a small scale with one other person, and just really doable to take that framework and then in the edit be able to play and continue to explore what actually a final form we wanted that to be.
Yeah. Wow. Sounds like quite a process.
Yeah, it has. It definitely has been. And then, I mean, yeah, it's been a long process.
Yeah, I can imagine.
It sounds like an incredible project, though, too.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And yeah, the flexibility on your part to recognize when to change the story, maybe, or the film, just how that works is, yeah, that's a good point on you. So.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, having completed the majority of your first documentary, which is a feature, which is huge, and especially something so personal and that you're really connected to, are you more interested in maybe also doing additional documentaries in the future, or is that really just if a topic happens to come up and you feel connected to it, then you would consider it, but it would be based on that versus like the process itself drawing you in?
Yeah, I think I think it's a project by it's kind of a project by project, idea by idea basis, and a narrative tends to excite me more. But it depends, like if either way, I kind of like a little room to play. So like something that is great about documentary is this question of like nonfiction and what are all the different ways that we can think about reality or truth, or then play with that, because documentary is in this container that's supposed to be truth, not necessarily objective, but it's supposed to be some kind of truth. So that already just inherently like raises these questions to me that are really interesting about bending that and referencing that and like playing with that. With the Sunflower Man thing, I recently just leaned more into like the folkloric aspect of it, because Rogan as himself is really interested in folklore, and like even when he gets manic and a little more like off his meds, like he gets really excited by stories or legends, and like he's always kind of played or started like performing these different roles, whether it was like the Joker or the Sunflower Man or the gardener or the beekeeper, like whatever project he's in, he like gives it this archetypal importance, which I knew from the beginning, but more recently I'm like, oh yeah, I actually want to lean into that for this story and like have the way that I'm doing that now. I just will share, because I never keep things really secret. I don't keep things secret on purpose. Like I just, I'm very private, but if I start talking about it, I'm like, I have no secrets. Here's what I'm doing. But like, so with Sunflower Man, I just recently, I'm like, oh, what I'm going to do with this is frame it with a voiceover, my voiceover, so that I'm also located in it. And it's like, I'm a voiceover of a storyteller, and I'm going to be telling the story like a legend of Sunflower Man over the documentary of what actually happened. So we'll be playing with like hyperbole and making it, intermixing that hyperbole with what you're actually seeing. So yeah, back to my point was, with documentary, what interests me is, or with narrative, what interests me is blending that line between what's real and what is mythical or subjective. In a narrative film, usually I also like to like lean into the documentary style. So with a narrative film, it kind of gets given that really present, organic, improvising feel to balance out the preparedness of the narrative. So yeah, I like to balance either one of them out.
Nice.
That's really cool.
So when it comes to your filmmaking, like what or who inspires you to do certain projects, or what is it that really gets you going? What inspires you really? I think my arc has
been about like just maybe something similar that a lot of us go through, which is really starting to question and interrogate, like, how can I actually make things that are interesting to me and not trying to make anything that I think is interesting to other people, or like even curate my own interest to like what would be interesting to other people, but really start leaning into like, okay, well, this is just like a moment that happened to me that actually I find very cinematic and I find very poignant, and I'm willing to make that, you know, into a short film, or like leaning into that confidence and reorienting that way. So filmmakers who, I think women in more recent years, like Phoebe Waller-Bridge or Issa Rae, and people who are actually like watching that content. And there was a moment, because I used to make a lot more production design. I was like interested in production design and style a lot more, and watching both of those were TV shows, but which are really character based, and you can see that the people are, the creators are just directly kind of drawing these cathartic portrayals of things that have happened to them, and the way that you as a viewer can feel so seen by that, and just that simplicity, like it struck me, the simplicity of that. There's no elaborate, I mean, they're beautiful, precisely made work, but there's in a way nothing so elaborate about the style. It's just, it does have this thing that people are just like, oh, it's so honest. And that's hard to quantify what makes something feel that way. But just that simplicity, I guess, like trying to keep that compass and that simplicity of what is honest to me and what is interesting to me. And when I go into the theater and I see my film, like now I've had this experience, like a couple of times where I go into the theater, I see my film and I feel seen by my film. Like by the time it gets to my film in a shorts block, I'm like, oh, thank God. Like some of the work is triggering. Like a lot of the work is actually triggering, or just kind of like, yeah, I can watch this, but I don't feel seen by this at all. Like I can enjoy something, but I don't feel resonant to it, like that's me or that's my voice. And it doesn't have to be my film for me to feel that, but getting that experience from my film is like, it's enough to keep making work. Like, okay, that's visceral, and if it's visceral for me, I know it's visceral for other people. So yeah. If that answers that, I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. So you had talked, I'm going to jump back to something that you had mentioned earlier about, that all of your experience really in the filmmaking industry so far has been in Minnesota. What do you, like and love about filming here in Minnesota? Like what has really kept you here?
I think, something very practical is like I have always been oriented towards content creation, and it's like I feel that freedom in Minnesota that I can do what I want to do without, restrictions, permitting. I think there obviously are cases of restrictions and permitting, but the point being, if you're on that indie film track specifically, it's a great place to be making work, because the process that you go through to make it an indie film happen is just different than like even working commercially in this town and in Minnesota. So it's just a really efficient in that way if what you are doing is actually trying to execute a vision. Like this is a very good place to be if you're trying to execute a vision, because there's not a lot of obstruction to that. So that, from a practical standpoint, is kind of why I'm like, I'm good here for now. Like there's not really anywhere else I need to be making the work I want to work, or that I want to make.
Right.
Yeah.
That being said, have you made any films outside of Minnesota ever?
I'm trying to think about that, but I don't think, nothing is coming to mind. I don't think that I have, no.
Okay.
Yeah.
If you had...
Okay, go ahead.
Nope, you go.
I was just going to say, like, I guess something that is interesting to me is, like, from a more emotional or, like, creative standpoint, is going into depth in a place. So Minnesota is kind of interesting to me. I've lived, so where I grew up was on Leech Lake Indian Reservation. And then so that is a very specific racialized experience. And then actually all the different places in Minnesota are racialized very differently. And it's this major impact on what kinds of cultures are coexisting together and totally segregated and separate from each other in a lot of cases. And so for me, something that is interesting that I kind of have been able to put words to in the last year or two is like, what is possible when we become curious about what's already familiar? So in Minnesota, like, there actually are all these very different places and people and experiences existing right next door to each other, and you know, you can have a kind of culture shock within different blocks of Minneapolis, St. Paul, right? There's a kind of culture, depending on how much you're willing to engage with that or not. So I think Minnesota as a whole state is kind of a macrocosm of that also, where like there's just a lot to continue to be here and start to get to some of the nuance that exist here. That is what interests me more, I guess, artistically, and also just in my life, like as a person.
Yeah, no, that absolutely.
Yeah.
I think that totally makes sense. And that's a good, I feel like we've had a lot of, you know, conversation before about just like different aspects of filming in Minnesota, but never quite that aspect. And it's really intriguing and an excellent point.
Right. And I don't think a lot of people engage with that. So that's something that I think is kind of, it's just mix, or I guess like of the, I want to say like, I guess a lot of white filmmakers and white creators don't necessarily engage with like how that actually is laid out and operating, and because again, like to be somewhere familiar for a long time is not enough in itself. You would have to be curious about what you don't know, about what you believe is familiar. And that's when you start to get to some of the depth and variety and nuance and subtlety that's existing all around all the time and was existing before you realized it. But yeah, it definitely requires engagement that that a lot of people aren't willing to like integrate that knowledge and that new knowledge.
Yeah, a lot of like missed opportunities for you know, that type of social engagement.
Yeah, that's a fantastic way to go. Factor to really keep like honed in on. So thinking about, and take kind of a zoom into your process as a filmmaker, what would you say has been your biggest challenge so far in your overall filmmaking process?
Hmm.
Or just like a big one that like comes to mind.
Yeah, can you say the question in another way? Or what do you mean the filmmaking process,
so just journey? Like, in the films that you've made, what's the biggest challenge that you've run into?
Yeah, just so many ways to approach that question. Great question. I think like one thing as my personal challenge in directing is really taking and creating time and taking responsibility for creating the sense of time. So what this thing we have in the film industry, or that the film industry has, that people kind of almost like to say about there's never enough time and there's never enough money. So that's impossible, right? Like even as a statement, that's impossible. So why do we have we tied ourselves to this logic that is just the logic of scarcity and of dissatisfaction? And it's also, if that wasn't enough, like that also has created so much physical and mental, emotional, like health problems with and harm within our settings. This idea that we have to bypass something because we don't have enough to do this, and we are operating. So what is going to be the first thing on the cutting block is either the quality of the film or your health, and we're hoping you can recover because we're resilient humans. So I think as a director, like really grounding that I don't want my sets to operate that way. And when I'm creating work, if I'm in the large picture creating work that I would hope would operate a sense of healing, then I don't want the process of making my work to be this unhealthy process. And I want the process of making the work to reflect the work also. And so to do that, we have to ground in that, like, we have enough time no matter what we have. We have enough money no matter what we have. And what are the things when that is a priority to feel that way, for the set to feel that way, to feel like we have enough time and enough resources to do that, then how does that start to shift, like what your priorities are and where you put resources and where you kind of try to ground while you're making the movie. And a lot of it is emotional and like willing to pause and willing to take a leap of faith and just be like, well, whatever this is, like I'm going to treat this like we have enough time and that I believe the product will be fine, and I'm not worried about the product that way. I'm worried about this moment. I'm worried about the process. So that has been an ongoing thing to practice. And the last project that I made in February 2020 was a great way to practice that, because we were shooting with like 15 people and we were shooting an 8-page film, and we have 7 hours in this one location.
Wow.
And it's this little bathroom, and it's an ensemble. So it's bathroom break, what I did.
Yeah.
And so already from the beginning, you have this restriction, which I love to work with restrictions. This is another example of the container thing. So we create this container that this whole film is happening in this bathroom, and we have 7 hours to do this. Now, our resources have gone towards craft and hair and makeup, and so that all the background can, look amazing and be very happy while they're waiting out there away, and they just have to be ready for this whole time. But they all have to be having a good time over there, feel taken care of, and basically be having fun, really getting professionally ready. And then the way that the film is structured is like these portions of scripted piece, and then a big section that's available to be improvised, so that we create this container where like, here's where it's magically going to all come together at the end. Like how, because we immediately, of course, get 3 hours behind. Somebody like starts forgetting all their lines because they're nervous. and so it's always going to be something like that, where then you have to be like, okay, well, I already knew going into this that this time thing is going to have to be done differently. It's going to have to be done on some kind of magic leap of faith. And I just have to let that go, that we have prepared this film, but now that we're here, it's going to happen in a different way than what we have prepared. So just leaning into and really practice and like not trying to avoid those things or using them as like, well, I know we'll improvise if we have to, but I hope we don't. It's like, okay, we know that filmmaking has this quality where it's, the interesting thing about it is partially prepared and partially magical. Like it's partially mysterious. We don't know how that happens. We don't know how that actually gets completed, because it never gets completed in the way that you thought. So how can you harness that, lean into that, and use that to like set yourself at more ease on the set? Yeah.
I mean, how many people did you have in that bathroom? I remember at least 4, but I mean, there's you, the camera person, and then how many other extras was it?
Right. There's 2 main actors. Then there's camera and sound and me. And then we, in the bathroom, I mean, at one time we were having all the extras kind of file around and file out. So at that point was the most, and I think there was like 9 or 10 of them. So I mean, we were cramped in there. But yeah.
Wow. Well, conversely to that, I suppose, what do you look forward to the most when either starting a new project, or what gets you really, pumped up for something?
I think it's always really energizing to me to have a new idea, and that excitement of like, oh, here's something I want to express, and that excitement of bringing new people. I think like the thing about film is you go through these different phases, and by the time I'm at the end of one of the phases, I'm really sick of it. Like by the time you're at the end of the writing phase, you're like, okay, let's just do it. We're in production now.
Yes.
And by the time you're at the end of production, you're like, oh, thank God, I'm going to be by myself editing, nobody else. And then by the time you're out of editing, you're like, I am going insane because everything in the world is happening inside my own head, and I can't wait to like collaborate with other people and like have this totally other energy about me. And so I think like the stage of having a new idea is a really exciting and energizing, it's like springtime, it's like that's a very easy stage for me by the time that comes around. So yeah, the more I have come to understand, the more challenging stage for me isn't starting, it's like it's finishing, like totally finishing the thing off is a little more challenging.
I can attest to that. I was in post-production on Electric Addiction for 2 years. It's a long process.
It's a long, and it's. I think it's like a lonelier. Like it's interesting. It's interesting because you kind of have to give time to it in this way, but it feels something a little more. I guess that's something to work on, but the natural energy feels a little bit more enduring or something. It's just like, okay, I have to. Like, I heard this thing that people typically often either have like their fears activated when getting something started or when completing it. And either way, the fear might be kind of the same or like a mirror image of each other. But yeah, for me, it's definitely like finishing it off. It's weird because you feel like that, like, I can't wait to get this done. Like, I cannot wait to get this done, get this off my plate. I like showing my work. Like, I usually have the feeling, like, aside from being nervous, but I have the feeling like I like showing the work, and I'm usually proud of the thing. So I have that conscious feeling, but there are definitely unconscious things at play that are like, I don't want to engage with finishing this and, you know, having to show it to people and having it be in a complete state and like whatever are all those unconscious fears definitely work on me.
Right. But yeah, I'm with you. A new idea is definitely gets the traction going. Yeah.
I'm going to do this in 2 weeks.
Exactly. If everyone could just fall in line and just show up and do the thing, and then we're good.
Yeah. Be super easy.
Right.
So Simone, what's next for you?
Yeah, I think working on finishing Sunflower Man, and I'm developing this other narrative project. That's kind of, again, a longer form thing. I'm developing that in collaboration. So that's kind of new. Those are the two things that are kind of on longer tracks. I guess what is interesting to me in the last couple of months that I've really been thinking about is particularly in making feature work, which I have wanted to move towards and I'm moving towards, the ways to sell, like, structure distribution and the dysfunctional like way that the industry currently works for film creators, especially those of us at like who are making stuff with less, well, what I would say more efficiently, who are making stuff much more efficiently. But yeah, really how to take sovereignty over that part of the process. And I just kind of had this from a book I was reading, triggered this different way of looking for me, which was like that I really want to approach my completed film as a whole business unto itself. So not, and really continue to take responsibility for the whole life cycle of the film and not be trying or even aiming to, you know, ideally I pass this off to somebody else to pay. But really if I approach that as like, what kind of effort and attention would I give this if I approach now that the film is completed, now it's my business. And, you know, we've completed it with a limited amount of resources. So actually making a profit on this isn't as hard as it would be if we were making $1 million of things. So the amount of people I need to get to watch this, for example, to pay $5 to stream this, isn't really an exorbitant amount of people if I focus my resources into that simple goal. What I'm also getting out of that is like prioritizing my relationship with the viewers and knowing who my viewers are, which is just information I won't get if I pass this off to a different distributor. I might not even get to know how many people, the simple number of how many people are watching the film. Right. Where if I continue to take, to be engaged and willing to be engaged with that aspect of like, yes, you should see my work. Like we made this thing and yes, we believe people should see it. And we are willing to create a team around that. And we are willing to go into not only show this towards filmmakers, because that's the other aspect I don't like putting things through the festival circuit. And then the people who see your film are filmmakers when that's probably not who your film is for. And so really taking responsibility, taking sovereignty for that direct line of like viewership that business side is of interest to me right now. So that's kind of what I'm starting to think about, as also, thinking about completing this project and continuing to develop the other project.
Wow.
Yeah. Well, Simone, where can people find your work? Where can they actually see this, and how can they contact you, or what are your followings for social, anything?
Yes, thank you. My stuff is branded by directed by Simone. So my website is directed by Simone, and that links to my YouTube and Instagram channels, but those are also directed by Simone if you prefer one.
Perfect.
And I usually tend, I haven't been that present on social media, but they are the venues of which, when I have things to say, that's where they go. So it's not really a spam, let me maintain my presence. No, but it is a useful aspect in when there's actually things to be communicated.
Great.
Awesome. All right, Simone, we are going to close it out with the big question.
Okay.
All right. What do you want people to remember most about you?
Oh, yeah, I saw that on the bottom.
Whether it's people you've worked with, or people after they've watched your films, or just whatever hits you most.
I guess, I don't know. It's a great question, but it's a difficult question too. I think it's a matter of what I try to do, whether it is in the making of the film or the showing of the film, is create this space where engagement is, and the collaboration and this sort of mutuality can exist, so that people can say, if it's in the viewing part, that people can say whatever those references are that the film reminds them of. I love when an audience would say, oh, that my favorite comments have always been, that reminded me of this poem I read. Or oh, your thing reminded me of a painting, da-da. Or, whatever small thing that it is, whatever reference point it is, because that's just what creates this richness. And same thing in the production of the film or any collaboration that I have, the aim and the intention is to create these containers for people to come into and bring themselves into. And that's the relationship. And then whatever the product is comes out of that relationship. Whatever the meaning of the film comes out of what we've both brought to it. So I want it to be an inviting space for people to come into.
That's amazing. I love that.
Yeah.
Well, Simone, thank you again so much for taking time out of your day to hang out with us and let us just learn more about you. It's been awesome getting to know you, and we hope to have you back on soon.
Thank you guys. And I think the podcast, it's such a great thing to do. So I think a lot of us, and I know that I do, really appreciate the service and just the straightforwardness of sharing these stories and information about ourselves with each other.
Yeah.
Thank you. Well, thank you all for joining in and listening, and until next time, this is Film in Minnesota.